What was the driving force that kind of put this job at the top?
Well, I think there's a lot of things, but none of which mattered anywhere near as much as my belief in Mrs. Benson and her commitment to this being as absolute as it was. I made a joke about making some outrageous demands, but we were really, really clear about where we are today and where we need to go in terms of the level of investment in this. And I think you're going to see that this very much models their level of investment in the Saints and their desire to make it as much of a flamethrower as that team is.
Did it in any way surprise you that they were so receptive to those demands? I mean, you obviously
Yeah.
knew the reputation from years and years. Did it
Yeah,
surprise
and
you?
I mentioned Mike Ford. He ran an amazing process, and he was a great partner in the process in terms of helping me get some understanding of what it was they were looking for. So I kind of knew coming into the room a little bit of what the desire was, but in terms of their willingness to deliver on those things, I was probably in the room for about 30 minutes um, before I really started feeling like, boy, I hope I don't mess this up. I really want this opportunity. They were very impressive in their vision and the way they saw things, and frankly, the like-mindedness we have.
Obviously, a big part of taking this job is figuring out the Anthony Davis situation. How realistic do you think it is that you will be able to convince him that this is a place he wants to be?
I don't know the answer to that. I think in speaking to Rich, I think there's certainly an openness to it. And frankly, I think Anthony has some excitement about what we have the potential to do. At the same time, it's more about, are you all the way in or all the way out? And there's not going to be something where this is, yeah, I want to be here, but this is what we're doing, this is where we're going, and we very much want to achieve what we think you want to achieve. And hopefully he's as like-minded as the front office and ownership are.
David, is it too much made about small market and things like that? Is that too much made over that? Was that a dilemma that you have to deal with?
Yeah, so this came up in the interview process. The notion that small markets can't win is nonsense. Um, we won in Cleveland. I mean, we had a parade. There was 1,600,000 down there, so I can prove that you can win in smaller markets. Um, what Dan Gilbert and his ownership group did was unprecedented in the amount of investment they put into it. But we won in a very inorganic way. It was all about win this championship today, and this is a situation where we get to be playing the long game and being mindful of sustaining success. So it's a different thing, and I think for this city and for this community, it's really meaningful because it's not easy to just flip the switch and win a championship tomorrow. But if you start building sort of to the ethos of the city, you can build something that attracts the right people. And we want to build something that lasts and that means something. And this city gives us a chance to do it because there's there, right? It's Cleveland's the same. Everyone's there because they love it. Everyone's there because they have incredible passion for it. That's what everybody's here for. And when we won a championship there, and generations of people coming up to me literally in tears that we delivered a championship for their grandfather to see or their great grandparents to see. It was powerful. And to be part of seeing that, it's not just that you can win a championship in a smaller market. You should want to win championships in a market like this because it means more. It's anybody can play the game if you cheat and you start way ahead. Let's win this together in a way that means something. So that was a big attraction to me actually. So I got upset when they said the thing about a small market can't win. That's I mean, tell that to all the small markets that have already done it. How big San Antonio?
How much did your relationship with Alvin from the past kind of influence wanting to keep him around and building around him?
Well, keeping him around was a no-brainer for me in terms of once we met and talked about where he was in his thought process and his desire to be part of what the vision was. It was a given. Again, I mentioned the only reason it's meaningful to have a relationship with Alvin is we can look each other in the eye and call each other on things, right? And he was very much of the mindset to be that. When we were together in Phoenix, I was with Alvin when he was an assistant. He had been a head coach multiple times before. And Alvin was really honest about the fact that he's at his best when he's fearless Alvin, when he's not looking over his shoulder, when he's not feeling like he has to do everything by himself. And I think we can put him in the space to be the best of his angels And when he's the lesser of his angels, or when I am, one of the two of us will have it out with the other. So it's a good situation, I think.
Obviously, a lot of the talk when you come into the job is going to be about the roster and how you're going to build the players on the court. But how important is it to kind of build the infrastructure behind the scenes, the people in the front office, scouting, and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, that's everything, and that's when I say the outrageous demands. That's where the investment comes from. It's not about what you pay any individual person. It's that you're willing to invest in organizational infrastructure. The bandwidth that Dan Gilbert and his ownership gave us was amazing. Our third in command there, Kobe Altman, is running that team now and doing an absolutely fantastic job. And it's because the infrastructure that exists there will run itself into perpetuity as long as they continue to elevate and support leadership. That's what you have to do here. My biggest goal in all of this is whenever I get run out of town on a rail, and we all do eventually, this can sustain itself for Mrs. Benson, and whoever she wants to put in charge will know that they're starting on really solid footing.
You mentioned you use words like organic and things like that. Is there a time frame though, or a structure? I know you referenced Cleveland and it was win now for this team. Do you have a vision, a plan? Is it a 2-year, 3-year, 5-year plan, or is it just kind of going to be developed over the next
Yeah,
few
not
months?
really. I wouldn't limit us one way or the other, right? I wouldn't pigeonhole us into a certain timeline. I would say that I think team building, everybody's become really lazy in this area, and everybody looks at it as binary. You either have to be terrible and tank, or you have to be trying to win this championship. And the reality is that's not how this works. And what we have to do is win, make several small wins every day, and cobble those together. Every deal we make stacks upon the last one. And there's going to be things we do that you're going to look at and you're going to say, what on earth are they doing? Well, we look at this as one deal feeds the next opportunity, feeds the next opportunity. And I think that's something that you'll see us invest in. And again, that's where the infrastructure thing comes from. We'll make a series of really good decisions, and hopefully eventually it all coalesces into we're a championship caliber team. I don't know how long that takes.
Are there any specifics that, in particular, I mean, they're obviously adding a G League franchise. There's some things that are already occurring. Is there anything you feel is taking them from an infrastructure perspective where they were kind of behind the curve to now you believe that this franchise can be ahead of the curve?
Not really. I mean, I think, this is not a statement about what exists here at all.
Sure.
But when you go about the process of building infrastructure, you don't hire roles, you hire people. And I think what we need to do, and Chris Grant, my predecessor in Cleveland, said this very well, we need to get all the right people on the bus, and we can figure out what we call each other once we're rolling to the right place. And I think that's a really meaningful thing. I think the areas where you have the biggest ability to build competitive advantage in infrastructure, very much in performance and player care, is an area that I put a lot of weight on. It's an area that I'm very familiar with reworking and believing in. I think you can do the same thing on the analytics side, not necessarily relative to, we've got the greatest nerd cave in the NBA, which is what we called our group in Cleveland. It's not about that. It's, do we have the best ability to translate what the data reveals in a meaningful way? Because data is not an answer in and of itself. It's only useful insofar as the quality of questions you ask it to solve. And I think that's what analytics needs to be able to do. And so that requires not just the right people crunching numbers, but the right people communicating that. So,
Do you have some people in mind? Is that some of the demands that you made?
I do have people in mind, but I also didn't make demands relative to a name. There were people types, there are individuals involved that absolutely were sort of non-starters for me not to bring. But I also don't feel like it was a situation where ownership needed to tell me, yes, you can hire that person. They needed to tell me that we have the bandwidth to hire the right people, and they've certainly done that.
Have you had any conversations with Anthony Davis recently?
No, I've spoken to Rich Ball, and he's talked to Anthony for me. I know Anthony's been on vacation. We have scheduled a time that we're going to sit down face to face, and I'll be able to give some more meaning to that conversation once that happens. I have communicated with Drew Holiday. I've communicated with all of the agents, basically, of all of our players. and I'm pretty confident that people feel comfortable with the direction we're taking today.
As a practical,
Any concern that the well was kind of poisoned here by all that's
No.
gone on before?
No, quite the opposite, actually. I think Rich is genuinely excited about this situation. Um, Rich represents the greatest player of his generation, and he saw LeBron buy into what we were doing in our direction and the respect he had for what we did. And I think LeBron himself has been very supportive of us as well in terms of, listen, they know what they're doing. So I think he'll have plenty of the right voices in his ear.
Just as a practical matter, is there a time frame in which you need to resolve the Davis situation, however that plays out?
Not really. I mean, it's not a race. I think you resolve the Davis situation when you look in each other's eyes and you know where each other lives. It resolves itself at that point. And then it's just a matter of going about the minutia of how you make the deal, which is, I think, one of the more overrated things from a fan perspective out there. These things, again, in terms of the negotiation process, it's my goal that you won't hear much of anything that's going on with us. I think the worst thing you can possibly do is be very noisy in these things. We're going to hope to be very silent. And if there's something that needs to happen beyond showing up at training camp and winning together, I hope we act upon it, and you never really know one way or the other what was going on.
obviously, Mrs. Benson just took over the team last year, so there's not a long history you can go back on. But what were you able to kind of take off in your mind and convince yourself that she is willing to do everything you're going to ask of her over the next few years?
Yeah, and we got into some of that. You know, why now? Why me? What's different today? And I think a lot of it has to do with just the fact that everything that led to her taking over and this being done in her vision is sort of resolved now to the point where she can really dedicate the level of energy she wants to it. And I think because of that, it became really clear in her own mind, this is what I want it to look like. I want the Pelicans and the Saints to be flamethrowers together. And I think she understands what that means. And she certainly made me feel that she did.
You mentioned Drew. Do you consider him a foundational building block for a franchise?
I absolutely do, yeah. I look at Drew as somebody, and as I said, we've communicated via text. He was on vacation at the time. I think he's excited about the direction. He wants to compete, and he wants to win. And I have every reason to believe he's going to want to do that with us. Drew is a guy who, frankly, as a competitor, is a lot of what you want your franchise to represent. So, yeah, he's very meaningful to us.
David, how tough would it be? You said you want to keep what happens with Rich Paul and Anthony Davis as close to the vest as possible, but Rich Paul is the one that leaked to Woj that he wanted to be traded. So
well, you think he did, right? So, I mean, we don't know that. We really don't know that. But anyway, continue. Sorry.
No. If there's a conflict, you don't think he's the one that leaked?
No, I don't. So for me, let's say he did, right? Okay, fine. And it's let's say it's a statement of fact that they leaked the story. I don't care, because this is going to take place between 2 people and 3 people sitting in one room, people who have history together in one case, and someone who I think is all about winning in another case. And we're going to have an adult conversation. It's not going to be this is complicated. It's not rocket surgery, right? This is, do you love where you are and winning here, and do you want to be part of what we want to build? And if you don't, okay, help me help you. This is what that looks like. It's not abundantly complicated. And frankly, he needs to hear what it means to be part of this too. He could hear what we believe it means to be part of this and say, yeah, thanks, I appreciate it. I'm not doing that. And that's his right to do. And it's every player's right to do. So if we're really good at this, we'll build something that everybody wants to be part of.
David, in a respectful way, you mentioned when you came up that you made a lot of demands and things like this. When you were going through the process, did you kind of feel like you were interviewing the Pelicans in a way? I mean, like a two-sided interview, like you needed questions answered before you were convinced, and the questions that you asked, you felt really, really good about what you needed to do.
I've handled every interview I've ever had like that, just in terms of what I mentioned about finding my owner. I didn't play in the NBA. I didn't coach in the NBA. I didn't have a rich background when I was first meeting with owners on these jobs. Jerry West offered me the opportunity to take over the Memphis Grizzlies in 2006 when I was 36 years old. And at the time, if you'd have asked me, I was like, oh, yeah, I'll be the greatest thing that ever happened. I still went into the meeting trying to interview them, despite the fact that I was utterly and completely clueless what this job really would have been. When I made the decision to stay, I made the decision to stay because we were in the process of trying to win a championship in Phoenix, and that meant everything to me. But I was really selective in that conversation. It's the only way I know how to do this. And the reason is you never get another chance when you're me. If this doesn't work, that's my fault. When you have a background in the game, things are a little different. And so for me, growing up the way I did with Jerry and Brian Colangelo and us being as successful as we were when Steve came on board as well, I was leaving a lot. So selectivity was something in my mind then, and it just stuck with me. So absolutely, I walked into every interview needing to understand where people live. Because again, we make this so much harder than it needs to be. It's how can I help you? How can you help me? Are we meant to do this together? Once you get all of that understood, the way we go about it, that's on them. They had to buy the vision of that. But if I knew unequivocally they were committed to this, I was going to want to be part of it. And then it was up to them to filter through all of the opportunity they had relative to the other names in the process.
But how much does it matter? Not so much just who the owner is, but having that direct line. How clear of a idea were you given that if you need something, you can go directly to
Yeah,
Gail?
very
She'll be
much
the
so.
only-
Very
Okay.
much so that I report to Gail or Mrs. Benson in that situation. I think what's interesting to me, though, and a lot gets overstated about this reporting structure and all of that, every organization has a decision-making process in place. In Cleveland, Nate Forbes, who was the owner's representative with us to a huge degree in basketball, Nate Forbes was the de facto president. He was an owner, but we talked to Nate about everything that we did. He was intimately involved in every decision we made and took a lot of those decisions to Dan. Jeff Cohen was involved in that process. So there's always going to be constituencies that are involved in a process like that. It doesn't matter who you quote answer to. Mrs. Benson has several people in her life that have been highly successful in this business and in the football business. And she's going to ask people, does that make sense? I'd want her to do that. So I understand she's got the right kind of support around her. And that's also a meaningful thing to me because the last thing you want is for the last person in your owner's head to be somebody who doesn't understand what we do. So.
You talked about the desire to want to win in a market like this, but coming off of last season, how much work do you think there needs to be done in order to convince the fan base that the team's heading in the right direction, and how much are you kind of mindful of that going into this journey?
Oh, very much so. It's great. Everybody can have that moment of, oh, yay, we hired somebody who won a championship. Well, we won a championship because the greatest player of his generation was from Akron, Ohio. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. That was a big part of what happened. We put ourselves in position to capitalize on that opportunity. But to a huge degree, the job was building trust and leading a group of people to something like that. And fans can't see that. The trust building that happens every day on the road, fans don't get to watch that. That's not something that's measurable. So I understand there's things people look at and they're going to measure this by, and we're going to be judged by. And I'm excited. I feel like that's a great opportunity for us. And if you judge us by our actions over time, I think our fans are very much going to believe that Mrs. Benson's serious about this.
Is there a style of play or a type of play or anything like that you have a preference for, or is it dictated pretty much primarily by talent?
Yeah, so I would have told you yesterday that I think Alvin and I being part of sort of the formulation of 7 seconds or less would have been revealing of the way we believe you need to play. And then Alvin sort of dejuiced me by telling me that those teams would be 26th in the NBA in pace right now. So I guess we weren't all that revolutionary after all. But yeah, I think the game's supposed to be played in a certain way. One of our players in Phoenix, Leandro Barbosa, was from Brazil, and I really knew nothing about international football. And he explained to me that Brazil is known as a beautiful game for a certain reason. It's because the ball moves around. I think that's the way the game is played the best. So I want to invest in people who have basketball IQ and the ability to play with others, if that makes sense, to facilitate for others as well. The ball should be moving. Now, there's an argument to be made right now, and a very compelling one, that what Houston's doing is deliberately designed to not have the ball move. That's a style that I don't particularly enjoy watching, but I sure like winning that much. It's not a model you can say we're going to do this, because the player who makes that possible really only exists in one place. So you don't build a style to that. What they've done is retrofit their style to their talent, and I think that's commendable.
David, I apologize if this has been answered before, but are you looking at the possibility to hire a general manager who reports to you?
Yeah, and I should have mentioned this in my opening statement. I'm not looking to hire the role of general manager. I'm looking to hire the right people. And if the role of general manager is what it takes to get the right people, then yes, we're open-minded to giving that opportunity to somebody.
Thank you, David.
Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
David.
Thanks so much, David.